So we'll start my 20-hour review at 33 hours because I've been pretty busy cutting. Mill's been doing well. There is definitely some downsides. I would say the good side of it, we'll start with the positive, let's say. The good side of it, the 14 horsepower motor is way more than enough. I've cut a few decent sized logs and it hasn't even slowed down at all. The tracking for it not having, it took some adjustment in the saw head initially, but for not having any forward to backward tracking, like for the blade level, it actually is quite good. I haven't noticed any odd like waves or something in it. The actual saw head frame is quite well made. It's the main part of it's never going to wear out. It doesn't say it anywhere in the owner's book, and there's a tag here that I don't follow that even at all remotely for the tension. I've learned with the other mill before, I had a homemade one before this, that I just followed the old school method of the wave when you run the mill just without a board in it. I think that's the best way for me to kind of gauge tension, and that's been working quite well so far. One thing that we did notice early on is I was having a problem with the fact that the cut was, it wasn't cutting flat. It was, or how do I explain this? The board was flat, but the cut was not right compared to the track, but the track was all leveled out. So we spent like a half day trying to figure out what the heck is going wrong here, because I was getting pissed off that as I was cutting down, my boards were fine, and then my bottom board would have a thick end or a thin end or whatever was going on. So what we ended up figuring out, we took a big level and put it on the blade, and the blade was not sitting flat. So the blade was actually leaning to the front. And since the saw doesn't have any tracking this way, like some of them do have the ability to turn it. Now I suppose this one you could do it with the blocks, but I don't really want the blocks taking that much of the force on the blade. So we loosened all of the saw head stuff off, including the guides in here. Loosened everything off, took it apart, or I guess loosened it, and once we did that, we actually ended up turning the whole saw head backwards. So this whole carriage moved just a little bit like that. So right from the start, we just didn't even think about it, tightened it all up, like put it on the track, tightened everything down without thinking about that fact. Once we loosened it up and angled it back, we actually were able to get the saw blade true to the deck, which made an enormous difference. So might be something to consider if you're having tracking problems or weird cuts or whatever, that it may actually be the carriage itself isn't quite square. So check your blade, put a long, like all we use is just a steel meter stick or ruler. So I can just put it on down on the blade, just lightly on the blade, and then someone can go from the front, like in between two of the bunks, and take a measurement, and that's how we figured out to get everything straight. Might make a difference for someone down the road if they don't know what is going wrong with the mill. It made a big difference for me, and I think the cuts were a lot easier to run the cuts through too after that. If you're cleaning the mill off, I use just an air gun, but the one spot that they really overlook is down in here on both sides, like your carriage. It fills right up with sawdust. So I didn't notice that. The first day that we were using it, and there ended up wet friggin' dirty sawdust was all stuffed in there. It's just nasty. So that's a definite spot to clean out. Make sure it stays clean, or is this gonna rust away, I guess? What I ended up doing, in the first video I was complaining about the scales, and I'm still gonna complain about it, but what I ended up doing was I just put the two of them together. So now the magnetic scales, I just laid them on top of each other. So now I've got my regular tape measure and I got the 1 and 2 inch just lined up. The 2 inch is actually wrong. So like 1 inch is the top of those two lines, but 2 inch is actually the bottom of the line. So it's like 1/8 of an inch off. As long as I know that, it's fine, but their scale should have been correct. But anyway, so that's just how I lined it up. I haven't got, they had a upgraded one of these that's actually like a sight line. I don't know why the mill didn't come with it, because I seen it on their website after we bought it, and I'll have to call them and see if I can get it. I don't know if it'll make a big difference on being able to see it or not, but it's something that I should be able to get, and hopefully they'll send it to me. A couple other things. If anyone is wondering why my handle is right down at the bottom for the throttle, it's just so that when I cut, I can actually see it. If you're an older person, this actually does make sense, but for me, I like watching where I'm cutting and making sure I'm not hitting the stops and everything. So I can saw with my, or run the throttle with my right, and I can watch. And when I'm doing 1 inch boards, it does actually make a difference that I can hold the board down just in case, because there's not a whole lot of clamp surface. It's usually just the last pass. It shouldn't go anywhere, but it's just something that I like to do. So it came, you can see the Kohler's upside down. It came with the pull start on the other side. So I'm going to say it again. I said it in the last video. It should have an electric start option, because it is quite annoying to pull it. But since it's a pull start, the pull start was on the other side. I don't know why you would ever be on the other side of the mill. There's nothing over there ever for you. So I flipped the pull start over. It was actually super simple, 3/8 mils, and I just turned it around. So now when I pull it, I can just pull it from this side. It's much easier than going over there, and my throttle's here if I need it. So that makes it way nicer. They should have thought of that, I think, initially. I'll throw in the clip of it when I had the level on it here. The track was actually sagging. Now I didn't think of it initially, and I guess I should have, because I would have thought that it would have been strong enough. But the weight of the head in between the feet was actually moving. So in between your 3-foot section was actually turning into a roller coaster. So all I did is I just got some threaded rod and cut it down and bolted it in, just to give me a little bit of support. Hopefully I can get it balanced back out. My back foot is actually off the ground right now because this section of track is not flat. So I'm hoping that the weight of it going back and forth will actually flatten it out. I'm not worried about the end, at the very end, because I'll never have a cut down there. So it's good here onward now. So that's something to maybe note if you're looking at buying it, is the track, at least in my experience, the track will not be flat after very long. It's got, I don't know what, 33 hours on it now, so the track should have lasted longer than that before it started doing weird stuff. Other thing that I added, that again I think it probably should have came with something, because without it on there, the sawdust initially was flying over to the neighbor's house. So I just added it's an old piece of like rubber stopper or something, just a hunk of rubber. So now the sawdust just hits that, and as you can see, it's actually a nice line of sawdust now. Where before it was going over and flying miles out the side. So again, that's really nice, and it makes a nice pile and it's not spreading out everywhere. I have noticed this thing, if I clamp it quite tight, I've actually noticed that it is like it pulls apart. So I'm still thinking of putting tacks on there. I haven't done that yet. Just when you clamp it down, if this is bolted in, it will actually bend this end out a little bit. Not ideal. This guy kind of full of staff at the moment, but that was just a flat piece. I got my other one here. So that's what it was before at the start, like when I got it. I didn't like that just because there was no grip on there. So when I'm doing my bottom board, to actually hold the board in, 2 inch it's not a big deal because you can be up higher, but if you're doing a 1 inch you need it pretty low, and there was nothing to grip it, so it's just like slippy. So I just cut the grinder, just cut out a notch in it, just something a little sharper, so now when that digs in, it actually will hold it a lot nicer. Do it from the right side. It just clamps a lot better, I find. It was a 5-minute thing, not a big deal for me, but I just like that, especially when I'm doing 1x4s or something. It makes a big difference for me. Keeps it clamped down a little better.